Hi, this is Lex, and welcome to the Fintech Blueprint. It's your podcast about fintech, decentralized finance, digital banking, investing, robo-advice, artificial intelligence, and all the other frontier technology that is transforming financial services. To get more content, like an illustrated transcript of this conversation in your inbox, subscribe at fintechblueprint.com. So without further delay, let's jump into today's episode. Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's conversation. It's going to be a fantastic one. We have with us today Ali Niknam, who is the CEO and founder of Bunq, which is one of the largest neobanks in Europe. And it's a fascinating story of incredible perseverance and scale. So with that, I'm excited to have Ali on the podcast.
Lex, thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
My pleasure. Let's just start with how large is Bunq today and what does it do?
Before I tell you that, let's take a step back because Bunq is now almost an oldie in the new fintech scene or era. We started back in 2012 at the height of the financial crisis with a bunch of people who felt like things should be better and banking should revolve more about users and about users' wants and needs. And so as a bunch of techies, we came together to try and improve this highly regulated and a bit antiquated sector. And the first thing we did was pursue a full banking license, which was at the time deemed to be impossible. And so we do like a challenge. We came together, we did our homework. We actually read the law books and the rule books and all the other books. And in doing so, we successfully attained a full banking license back in 2015 and became the first greenfield company in the Netherlands to get a European banking license in over 35 years. And our vision has always been very simple, which is we put our users front and center in everything we do. We have a laser focus on our users, and we try to make life easy for them. I appreciate with the existing notion of what a bank is, we may think banks are simple, but if you compare that to what we believe a bank could be, your financial buddy, in our view, then we believe that the tools and the app and the service we provide, significantly make life easy for our users. And I mention this because it is based on this very simple conviction that we have grown to what we are today.
I would love to get to the early days of how it was all coming together and what the landscape looked like and sort of what made you move forward with this. But let's just kind of anchor the scale of the bank today. I know that I think a few years ago it was 9 million users, and I think it's gotten bigger since then. Assets, I believe, are over 5 billion, right? What's the footprint?
I believe the latest numbers we disclosed are a totality of 17 million users on our platform with over 8 billion in deposits. And that makes us basically the second largest neobank in Europe.
How many countries are you in?
All the European countries, you can sign up for our services. We are in the process of getting licenses in both the UK as well as the US.
And this is kind of a weird question. I'm interested in it since you said of it as being your financial buddy. From a brand perspective, what is the personality of Bunq as compared to the others in the top 5 in the Europe neobanks market?
Well, actually, that's a really good question. But I believe behind that question is another question, which is who is our competition? For the insiders, for the fintech insiders, for the people who work in the fintech industry and have taken an interest in this sector, they may believe that our competition is Revolut or Monzo or, N26 or whomever you'd like to compare us to. But actually what we see is that our real competition is with the incumbent banks, whether it's ING in the Netherlands, BNP Paribas in France, Sparkasse in Germany, etc., etc., etc. I believe that because we have spent so much time in building a product people love to use and building a company that people entrust their money to, Bunq is actually used as a bank as a primary bank and not just as a money service. Because we are used and seen as a full bank, people compare us to the other full banks, of course.
As compared to the traditional banks, you have a personality rather than having no personality.
Yes, we have a face, we're friendly, we're transparent, we have all the values that one could consider as being modern. You can reach us, we're normal human beings, instead of being this faceless, anonymous machinery that's, treats you like a cog in the wheel.
Let's then go to the beginning, and forgive me for using the word neobank, but in the time when you were starting the company, it wasn't yet obvious to everybody. I think it was clear to a number of people that digital and mobile storefronts were the way to interact with financial services, but it wasn't obvious to everyone. And we had a couple of examples that led the way, so Bank Simple in the late 2000s, and kind of the beginnings of digital investing in the US and so on, but really just kind of the introduction of the idea. What was the landscape for digital banking when you had your founding moment, and what were the seeds that led you to building the company?
Yeah, that's a great question, because you see, many of the companies you just mentioned that I also know, they focus on building an app on top of existing infrastructure. So they were really good at creating an app, but on the one hand, they were held back because they had to still interface with outdated, backends. And on the other hand, they didn't have full mobility of movement because they were dependent on the license of the bank to be able to offer whatever service they were envisioning. I think Bunq was the first who said, you know what, we're not going to do first a version on top of another bank, or get a e-money license, or get a PSP license and then build it out. No, our vision is that we want to fundamentally change the financial sector. We want to make the financial sector into something that is more user-centric, because it's easy to forget, but that wasn't the case back in 2010 and the years before. And so rather than first building a layer on top of something else, we're going to immediately apply for a banking license. This was incredibly hard because, first of all, because there had been no greenfield permits for 35 years, nobody really knew how to assess a greenfield application. And by working together with the Dutch regulator, we came up with many of the concepts that are now common, such as a sandbox environment, for example. Then secondly, because, we now have terms like Fintech and neobank, but these didn't exist when we applied. So it was notoriously hard to explain what it was we were trying to do, and why the regulator, who is inherently risk averse and conservative, would approve us. So many of the conversations were like, okay, so what's going to be the difference between you and ING? And we would try to explain, well, our culture is different, our focus point is different, the service is going to be different. And then they would say, yeah, but you just have an app and they have an app too. So you can imagine how difficult it has been to achieve that first milestone. But once we achieved it, I feel like the doors opened, because very quickly we were able to launch, and we launched with something that did turn out to be competitive with the big banks. And so world changed.
Yeah, I'm sure the regulator was not there with open arms in the beginning of the 2010s at all. I like your point about not just trying to build, something that rides on embedded finance, which at the time wasn't even really there. But that takes a certain amount of appetite for pain, because like everything you've described, if I put myself in the seat at that time, it's like all you've told me about is fixed cost and how long it's going to take you to launch, right? So like, if you're not going to sit on top of another bank, and God forbid you're trying to build your own core banking system, that's 25 million of cost. And if you are going to try to get a bank license, that's probably 2.5 years of legal regulatory fighting, that's going to keep you out of the market. So can you tell me about what gave you the perseverance and the conviction to kind of push through that, and maybe that's also a tie into You took this risk on your own, using your own capital. Did that allow you to do things that other founders weren't able to do?
So that's a really, really great question. And also thank you for acknowledging something that many people overlook, which is the incredible, painful dread of getting this over the line. Because you are right, it was very difficult. And it wasn't, some people see the excellent series Silicon Valley and they think, you show up, you drink some beers, somebody punches a hole in the wall, everybody's laughing, you go home happy. That's not really how it works, at least not for us. But I think, the people that joined Bunq at start, they were all very idealistic. And I believe that idealism still exists today. We truly felt that we were doing this for the greater good. And we were touching many social aspects. For example, when we started, because of the financial crisis, youth unemployment was very high in Europe. For example, in Italy, it was over 30%. So one of the things we did at Bunq is we purposely hired younger people to get them off the streets, because there's nothing worse than not being able to have a job in your formative years. I mean, this happened in the 1980s, and people talked about the lost generation, because if you don't learn how to show up on time and, what discipline means and what responsibility means at a young enough age, it's difficult to learn this later on. Things like user-centricity, actually caring about the people who use your services rather than just seeing them as a wallet that, you're trying to grab as much money out of. That was new. I mean, if you spoke to some bankers back then, not all of them, but some bankers back then, these were just commercial sharks trying to get as much money as they could. The image of the Wall Street banker, I guess, that's a known image. And then to change all of that amidst of a crisis that led the regulators to be even more conservative was incredibly painful. And the one thing that drove us through it is this belief that no matter what, we were doing the right things for the right reasons. And that helped us to endure. And then as for your second question, the reason why we didn't attract any funding is because we were playing the long game. I don't know what your experiences with VCs and PEs are, but we were convinced that if we would go the PE or the VC route, we would have been forced to develop a product, launch within a year, get some users, then go for a bigger license or a more elaborate license and iteratively, do things. But that didn't match with the ambition we had and the ideology we had. And so for us, there really was no other route than to self-fund it, so that there was no shareholder pressure or less shareholder pressure to become profitable within X time, so you can do an exit within Y time, and, et cetera, et cetera.
The time horizon of investors is very often not
Short.
the structure that gets you there. Yeah, especially when you're doing the most difficult things, unless you do have really particular partners. What was it like once you got your first product formulation in market? Like, what was the very first product that you were able to ship? And then how big was the team when that product shipped? And how did you get your first customers to use it?
Okay, so this is a while back, and I'm trying to be as accurate as I can, but take it with a grain of salt, because, it's almost 10 years ago. Or actually, it is 10 years ago. I believe when we launched, we were about 45 people, and we launched with a simple service on the front end side that allowed you to do basic banking, payments, online payments, peer-to-peer payments. But already that first version had a lot of things that are now more common, but that were innovative for the time, such as payment requests, being able to get money back directly to your bank account from someone else's bank account, or having invites to your bank account. So you could have like a shared pot with whatever number of people you wanted to have. So those things were very, very new. And of course, purely the fact that you could sign up online, that was new at the time. We didn't have many of the tools that we have today. There was no Face ID. So we had to come up with our own biometric identification, stuff like that. Those things were very, very innovative at the time. As to getting our first customers, because it was such a newsworthy moment that we indeed got our banking permit, at least in the Netherlands, it was all over the news. And because it hadn't happened, right? So people were just curious, and we got that first initial push.
And how big did that get you?
I don't remember. It was big enough to get started. All we were worried about at the time was because all of this innovation you see in the front end was preceded by a lot of innovation in the back end. We built our own core banking platform that could do things and can do things that no other core banking platform can. And so, obviously we had tested it and it worked and et cetera, et cetera. But, launching and then getting all those, I think we had 5,000 users in the first day or something, which is a big number when you just start. And, you're dealing with other people's money. So you want to make sure that everything goes well. And it all went very fast from there.
Around the same time in the US, you had robo-advisors as a category emerging. Also, the words weren't there, but that was going on. And Betterment, which now I think is 60 billion or something like that in assets, launched at TechCrunch Disrupt. Like their killer feature, I will forever remember this. Their killer feature was the fact that you could move money into their account. Like that was it. They did. It wasn't like you could really invest into a thing because going from cash into an ETF would be difficult, at least as I remember it. But it was, their TechCrunch Disrupt demo was somebody in real time, like opening and funding the account. And they also made the choice, kind of like you, where, half the companies, and this is what I had done, built on top of other custodians and brokers, which is the equivalent of sitting on top of a depository institution. And they had built their own broker dealer and vertically integrated. And so they were able to get this performance boost, which creates a customer experience that's very difficult to replicate if you're sitting on third-party infrastructure. And as we've seen with the collapse of Synapse, which tried to be the middleware between banks and fintech sort of customer footprints, like if you're doing spaghetti code, it's going to be spaghetti code. So it's a huge investment, but it definitely pays off.
I fully agree. We fully agree on that point, I think. But it's a pain to get there.
So what was the sequence of additional products that you launched once you were able to hold money and move money?
I think the nice thing is that because we are so user-centric, from then on, it was basically simple. We were led by feature requests from our users. We have so many things today. I can't replicate the sequence of events anymore from memory because basically, we have been doing 10 years of innovation. We do 3 Bunq updates per year, which are big events in this theater in the center of Amsterdam where hundreds of people show up, hundreds of users show up, and where we launch, all these new things. Last Bunq update, we launched crypto, which is innovative if you see it in the perspective of banking. There are no or not many banks that allow you to invest in crypto directly from the bank app. So that's the thing. But we also launch seemingly simple things, but that people really love to use. So for example, last Bunq update, we launched customizable cards where kids can draw their own, styles and figures on the card, and then we produce it for them. And kids love this. They absolutely love this. We've had so many innovations. I can give you a list afterwards, but it's too much to mention. Yeah.
Let me then structure the question this way. As you scale the company from 50 people to 500 people, and you're listening to customers who are going from those initial 5,000 to 5 million and on, right? The company has to change, and you need to design the organization in a way that maintains the current business, but then also organizes product teams in a way where they can innovate. Tell me about the organizational design of Bunq once you started to have that traction. Like, how did you design the company? What was the product development process, and what were the customer feedback loops to make it work?
That's a really good question, because I believe also within the company structure, we're quite different. And we decided to build something that's I haven't heard much of. I guess you may know that traditional companies are organized around functional domains. So you have a CFO, he has a head of finance, head of FP&A, head of treasury, head of whatever, and you go down the tree in getting more and more specialistic about people's knowledge areas. And then you have product and, and so you go. At Bunq, we are organized quite differently. First of all, we expect each and every employee to be in direct contact with users. So that means that all employees, including myself, we all do support tickets. And this, gives a wide understanding of what it is our users want or where we need to improve throughout the company. So that's one. The second thing is we are not organized along functional domains, but we're organized along users' wants and needs. So basically, we have taken our user, we have defined a persona. We call her Ava. This is the prototypical user, and everybody knows who she is and how she thinks and what she believes in, what she prefers or doesn't prefer. We have pictures of Ava all across the office so that everybody is reminded all of the time that this is the person that we are building this product for. And then basically we have organized Bunq in her getting to know us, her getting to use us, her getting to love us, and her getting to stay and invite other people to use Bunq. And I appreciate this sounds very simple, but this very different structure then comes with all kinds of challenges because people are not used to working in this manner.
What kind of titles do people have? Like VP of getting to know me. Like how do you recruit people into this? And people like feeling a sense of prestige and control and ownership and so on. What do you do there?
That's one of the secrets of Bunq. Well, secrets not really, but titles don't mean anything. People almost are free to choose whatever title they want because we don't really care what your title is. And so we often end up choosing a title that helps a person execute their job better because indeed sometimes a more senior sounding title opens up doors. What matters at Bunq is how many ownerships you have and which ownerships these are. And ownership is basically a problem to be solved for Ava in her journey from her not knowing about us until her becoming, a Bunq fan. And this journey is split up in tiny steps. And each of these steps is a problem to be solved. And it has processes to make sure that the problem is not just solved once, but has been solved in a replicable manner. And then depending on which of these steps you own, that basically makes you more or less senior or prestigious within the walls of Bunq.
How data-driven is this whole architecture? Like, how do you keep people accountable? Is it objectives, key results, or KPIs? Like, how do you deal with alignment in the sort of spine or skeleton of tasks to do? And then often also you have to think about the shapes of teams. Some are teams with ownership of a problem, whereas others are kind of horizontal enabling teams, right? Like people and talent or the accounting for the entire business or legal, right? So, or some sort of technical specialty, the best person who knows database design and scalability who can help everybody or something like that. So what's the nuts and bolts of measurement and then topologies of the business?
Now, obviously, whatever structure you're going to have is going to have some friction, right? You always end up in some sort of matrix where two things intersect. But I think what's really nice about Bunq is that at least this structure enforces and underlines the priority we give to being user-centric. And so most KPIs of most people end up being user-centric as well. So we actually have basically two things. So we have, on the one hand, we have people who maintain or take responsibility for an ownership. And on the other hand, we have objectives we want to achieve. And so I don't want to say we have self-organizing teams, but, in many projects, we have self-organizing teams where, somebody decides based on whatever input, like, hey guys, we really need to fix this, or we need to build this, or we need to improve this. And then various people from throughout the company, because we are not structured in a strict formal hierarchical way, pitch in, and then basically they create a Slack channel, and everybody sits in there, and then okay, this is what we're trying to solve. This is when we need to solve it. You do this, you do that, I'll do this. Let's speak tomorrow to see how far we are. So it's a very dynamic process. And it is not a structure I've seen anywhere before. Maybe as a little bit of context. So Bunq is my third unicorn. I've created other companies before, and my first unicorn was then called TransIP, today called Team Blue. It is the world's third largest domain name and web hosting provider. And we launched it back in 2003. And I think it was 2004 or 5 where we started organizing this company in what we call units. And basically that is very similar to what has become publicly known as tribes and, basically the Spotify model that became very popular. And I'd like to think that if that was organizational design version 1.0, what we are doing at Bunq is version 2.0. It is more granular, it is more dynamic, and it is more results driven.
It sounds very, very responsive. I'm avoiding the word of the use agile, but sort of like fit for purpose and kind of shaped around the demand that you see, in a way that somebody in a big bank driving sort of like a oil tanker is going to have a lot of trouble moving a very large rigid structure. But like you said, everything comes with trade-offs. And so it comes to mind, the Zappos experience with Holacracy comes to mind. At Consensus, we also had sort of very decentralized thinking about how to build teams and ownership. And I think it's a difficult thing to land, in part because the talent you have to bring into the organization has to be of a very particular kind. You touched on hiring young people, but I'm sure there's more to it than that. How did you think about recruiting and the recruiting machine for people who will fit this culture? And, to whatever extent you can share, I think it's also important to understand incentives, right? So was there any special magic in designing equity incentives or other incentives? And I'm just thinking about that situation where I'm on the team that's all about, brand awareness, and then somebody else is on the team about customers who are, let's say, leaving for whatever reason, and you're trying to reduce churn through a last minute offer, and the people who are having a problem with the churn are trying to fix something with brand. So they go to the brand team, and the brand team's like, well, my main KPI is new onboarding. So I don't really want to spend time with the churn people, right? So it goes to, who are the people you're filtering for? And then what are the incentives from an equity or otherwise perspective to get it to work?
It starts with getting people that are aligned culturally. Culture is for us very important. That's step one. And that is exponentially difficult as you grow bigger, but it's also exponentially more important to get it right as you grow bigger.
What is culture? Is culture people I personally get along with and and that understand me?
For us, culture is two things. One, the same work ethos, and two, after a hard day of work, someone you want to drink a beer with or a tea with or whatever it is you want to drink. Which is why, at least, and you have to see this in a Dutch perspective, right? So many of these things may be more commonplace in Silicon Valley today, but in the Netherlands, 15 years ago, many of these things were unheard of. So food is a big thing at Bunq. Eating together, drinking together, that's a part of our culture. That's the informal bit. That's how people, especially because we have a lot of people coming from all over the globe, that's how people connect. In the early years, when we were a little bit smaller, we used to party together as well. We would work, and then Fridays we would have a beer round. Beer round is where people come by with a cart full of beer and they introduce themselves. So that was a really good process of getting to know the new people who had joined. And then, we would have dinner together. And then, as you may know, Amsterdam is a big party city. So then we would end up going to some kind of venue together and have some fun to blow off some steam after a week of very hard work. So for us, culture is that people you genuinely enjoy being with on the one hand. And on the other hand, it's also a work ethos, which we like to describe as just getting shit done. So we don't like people who are, I don't want to hear that the dog ate your homework or that you're late because the bridge was open. Or we want people who just move the needle. And so we try to make sure that whoever comes through our door adheres to these both principles. So that's one. The second thing is, as a function of our idealistic approach, we try to understand what people's motives are. I mean, are you looking for a job? Are you looking to make a difference? Are you looking to prove yourself? Are you looking for money? Are you looking for a visa? I mean, people have different motivations, right? And we try to find the motivations that align with our longer term objectives. Thirdly, being in Europe, things like equity haven't been a thing in the Netherlands. Yeah. I mean, it's socialist Europe, right? So you pay taxes. The government takes care of you. You have a healthcare system that works that you don't need to pay that much for. You have pensions. You have schools. I mean, I'm in New York right now. I love New York. I love the US. But if your kid needs to go to school, you often end up having to go to private school that costs, I don't know, 50K a year, 60K a year. I mean, all of this is well taken care of in a European context. And I think in that context, equity is not a thing. Like even today, after having spoken to the government for many years on this topic, only now I believe that as of this month, they are going to introduce new fiscal measures that make it feasible for employees to have some sort of equity stake. That's also a thing that this European environment has a very different reward structure to the US. What we try to do is we try to be transparent because that's one of our values. When we first started, because I self-funded it and we were loss making, we told people, look, this is the type of money we have. Don't expect you're going to get the highest pays here. But what you will get is a unique experience and an opportunity to, have an influence that you wouldn't get on a big oil tanker. And for a very big group of people, this was very appealing. And, we got somewhere. And then about 3 years ago or 4 years ago, I don't quite remember, when we became profitable, we changed that strategy because now fairness is a big thing at Bunq, right? So now we were no longer loss making and we moved from the 50th percentile to the 95th percentile. And so working at Bunq today, you can expect very high salaries, but with that comes a huge problem for us as well, because now suddenly we're getting an enormous inflow of people who don't necessarily align with our ideology and with our vision. And they're just there because the salaries are great. So that then creates new problems on making sure that we hire the right people, et cetera, et cetera.
It's really the DNA of how all these companies are. And from the DNA, you get the end result and the expression, right? Like you did this for 10 years. And at the end of 10 years, what you're going to get is clearly the outcome of the machine and the inputs that you've seeded into it. And I think a lot of fintechs that have grown up over the last decade and have had, for some of them, the privilege to get customers and get over the initial hump and so on, now they're behaving as the organisms that they are. And that comes from that original DNA. We've got only a little bit of time left. And what I kind of want to hit on, and you've mentioned it a little bit, is Europe. Because Europe is in a kind of a contentious place right now in the world, right? You've got the US and China driving enormous narratives around high tech and value creation coming from either artificial intelligence or the foundational models underneath it, or, blockchain-based mega services, many of them dollar denominated. And there's sort of this negative buzz around, is there venture for investing in Europe? Or is the market big enough? Is the regulator too slow? GDPR was so destructive for tech companies, and look at all the enterprise value that's not here, but over there. How do you respond or think about these narratives, having built a large and valuable company in Europe? And what do you say to the skeptics or even just the entrepreneurs who are here who are trying to decide where to build their company and how to do it?
Well, this is a question where it's difficult to answer, right? Because whatever answer I give is going to be outdated in 1 or 2 years' time, and then everybody's going to blame me for whatever answer I've given. But look, if I look at Europe today, I think it is hard to beat Europe as a place to be, especially during summer. The streets are clean, the food is fantastic. You can get whatever you want in an hour and a half or two, totally different cultures, totally different, whatever, architecture is different, languages are different. That is great. That's so appealing about Europe. It's a great place to live. When I look at the social infrastructure, so many things in Europe are genuinely fantastic. Things like schooling, healthcare, the average education level of an employee. This is all very perfect. But what Europe lacks is leadership. It's not quality. It's not, it's leadership. And because of a lack of leadership, all that brain power has been unfocused and dispersed. And so rather than having the left and the right hand working together, as we have in the US and China, the left hand is tugging left and the right hand is tugging right. So on the one hand, of course, privacy is very important. And so you have a group of people who are rightly concerned about that, and they come up with regulation like GDPR. But then being able to afford this great healthcare system that we have built over the years is also important. So on the right hand, you have people that are trying to build a business that generates jobs and income and therefore tax income that ultimately pays for all this stuff. And they're going in a different direction. And I think what Europe lacks is this cohesion. I mean, not too long ago, you're in London, Europe almost fell apart, right? You had Brexit, and then in the Netherlands, people were like, hey, maybe we should exit too. And this lack of cohesion, that's what's hurting Europe today.
How do we get out of it?
Well, that question has a very simple answer. It's not the how do we get out of it, because the how is very simple. That is, unify our vision towards a common goal. So I don't believe anyone disagrees with that, right? The problem is, how do we reach that common goal? And that's what has made Europe both great as well as weak. So the greatness is that there is this divergence of thought, and there is this divergence of, societies that leads to this vibrant place where everybody loves to be. But then at the same time, something's got to give, right? You can't have someone making it their life effort to make sure that each and every website on the planet has a cookie banner. Whereas on the other hand, people are like, dude, what has this cookie banner ever brought anyone, so to speak? And then unless one of the two sides is willing to step towards the other side, we're going to be in the place that we are now. And then the consequence of that is that many, many, many of the more serious entrepreneurs I know simply move away, mostly towards the US.
Yeah, it's a challenging situation, and it gives even more context to your accomplishment of being able to build across all of these barriers and create, a company of the scale that Bunq occupies today. So thank you for sharing your views and the journey.
Oh, thank you so much for that compliment. It means a lot. Thank you.
If our listeners want to learn more about you or about Bunq, where should they go?
Well, perfectly. Download the Bunq app. Let us know what you think. There's a first 30-day trial. Get on the lead plan, start spending, get that cash back, experience what it's like to have Bunq, invite your friends, look at all the amazing features we have built. Don't use it as a traditional bank, because that's not what it's intended for. Try to have it as your financial buddy that makes your life easy. So that's one. And two, you can have a look at bunq.com or look at one of our Bunq updates through YouTube. But mostly enjoy our product, because we have built it for you.
Awesome. Ali, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Lex, for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Hi everyone, that's it for this week's episode of the Fintech Blueprint. For more technical deep dives into all things fintech and decentralized finance, check out fintechblueprint.com and grab a free subscription to the newsletter. This is Lex, and I'll see you next time.